The proposed U.S.-China Board of Trade is making headlines ahead of a pivotal meeting between President Donald Trump and President Xi Jinping. On the surface, it's a mechanism to manage trade and investment between the world's two largest economies. But beneath this diplomatic veneer lies a complex geopolitical shift that has significant implications for Southeast Asia. Let's start with the facts. The idea behind the Board of Trade is to create a formal channel for negotiating what goods and services are exchanged between the U.S. and China, and in what volume. A separate Board of Investment would tackle barriers to investments in either country. While this sounds cooperative, the reality is far more strategic and contentious. For Washington, the proposal aims to isolate trade in non-sensitive sectors, such as agriculture and consumer goods, while keeping critical industries like technology and defense off the table. For Beijing, however, the appeal lies in reducing tariff volatility and securing a predictable system of bilateral negotiations, where it believes it can exert equal leverage. But why does this matter for Southeast Asia? Historically, ASEAN nations have relied heavily on trade and investment partnerships with both the U.S. and China. If the world's largest economies adopt a managed trade framework, it could reshape the global trade environment, pushing smaller economies into riskier bilateral agreements. This shift would undermine multilateral systems like the World Trade Organization, a cornerstone of rules-based trade that has long protected Southeast Asia's smaller economies from coercion. China, in particular, has often preferred bilateral arrangements, where its economic and political weight creates a power imbalance. For ASEAN nations, this development is concerning. If Beijing gains greater control over global trade norms through mechanisms like the proposed Board of Trade, it may embolden China to impose similar frameworks on Southeast Asia, tying nations into dependencies that weaken their sovereign decision-making. The timing is also notable. The Trump-Xi summit follows years of escalating tariffs and U.S.-China trade disputes, with average tariff rates exceeding 30% on both sides. While the U.S. Supreme Court recently limited some of Trump's tariff powers, these trade restrictions remain a key battleground. The Board of Trade proposal signals a shift in Washington's strategy, from demanding structural reforms in China's state-driven economy to negotiating terms of trade directly. This move risks sidelining long-standing concerns over state subsidies and intellectual property theft, issues critical to regional economic fairness. Moreover, such bilateral mechanisms lack binding enforcement. Historical precedents, like the failed Four-Pillar Dialogue from 2017, show how fragile these agreements can be. They are often abandoned when political winds shift, leaving smaller nations caught in the crossfire of great power competition. For Southeast Asia, the stakes are high. ASEAN nations must navigate carefully to ensure that U.S.-China power struggles do not erode multilateral systems or regional stability. They must also resist pressure to adopt bilateral trade mechanisms that make their economies more vulnerable to coercion. The principle of a rules-based multilateral order, upheld by international law, remains the best safeguard against economic dependency and power imbalances. Ultimately, the proposed Board of Trade reflects the intensifying rivalry between Washington and Beijing, but its implications reverberate far beyond these two powers. For Southeast Asia, the question is clear. Will this shift undermine the sovereignty of smaller nations, or can ASEAN leverage its collective voice to demand inclusive, equitable trade frameworks? The answer to that question will shape the future of regional stability for years to come.